Alrighty, in this video, we're finally going to take all of our awesome generated code that we have right here and put it to use. So basically what that means is we're going to be removing all instances of references to Castle Dynamic Proxy within our solution and replacing it with the equivalent of using this. Fortunately, it's not going to be that big of a deal because we are going to be using the iStatic Proxy Interceptor, which is fairly similar to the interceptor that we've already been implementing. So not a lot of code really has to change in order to get this to work. Now, I am going to be doing this on both the server and the client side, and the reason for that is primarily because at some point I really do want to refactor my server code, my server system code, so that it shares a common code base with the client system code. So we'll do that eventually at some point, but for now, we're not going to worry about it. But at the very least, we'll go ahead and remove all references to Castle Dynamic Proxy and instead use our generated code. And in addition, our generated code in the future may include more performance increases, such as performing inline serialization here and all that fun stuff. Okay, so, yeah. How do we do that? The first thing I got to do, the easiest way to do this would be to right-click my solution, go over to manage NuGet packages for solution, and coming up here to the top left and selecting installed packages, and scrolling over here to castle.core. Now we have two versions of it installed, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit manage. Then I'm simply going to uncheck every single project and hit OK. What did that do? I have effectively uninstalled it from all of the projects. So that's cool. And then here on the next Castle core, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select manage. I could also come up here to the top left and just click that once, and it removes it from the entire project. Hit OK. And now I've removed a reference to Castle throughout the entire solution. Life without NuGet was miserable. Anyway, the cool thing about what I just did is now I have a roadmap. Whenever I do a major refactoring, I always like starting with a roadmap that will get me through the refactoring. And the roadmap is easily accessible. All I have to do is hit F6. Because F6 is going to, when I try to compile, it's going to throw an error everywhere where it can't reference Castle Dynamic Proxy, which shows me where it's used, which gives me a list of every single file I have to go and edit. So I'll go ahead and pin that. And let's start off with this. Let's start off working from BuzzMMO base down. Now the first set of errors I get is in the component proxy generator class. Now this class is now obsolete. We no longer need it because this was just a wrapper around the proxy generator that came from Castle Core. So what I can do here is I can expand BuzzMMO base, go to infrastructure, select component proxy generator, and delete it. Now I can hit F6 again. And now we get an error in the client. So let's go ahead and fix the client first. So to do that, note you'll get an error in both the Unity client and the normal client because they share the same code files. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this using statement at the top of the file because that reference is no longer valid. Then I'm going to come down here to the create proxy for. Instead of doing a component proxy generator dot create interface proxy without target, what I need to do now is I need to get a reference to the actual mapped component that represents this particular interface. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and replace all of this with component proxy generator. Now component proxy generator actually isn't referenced yet, so we'll have to make sure that we reference it. Remember, it's from the BuzzMMO based generated project, which is not yet referenced by client. So make sure you open up client, open up references, add reference, come down here to BuzzMMO based generated, hit OK, and then do the same thing for client Unity. Add a reference to BuzzMMO based generated. So make sure you do that. Now we can access our awesome component proxy factory. So I can say component proxy factory dot create, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the mapped component and the proxy interceptor. Now the proxy interceptor is going to stay the same. However, this mapped component right here, I'm going to refactor into a variable because I need to pass it as the first argument into this method. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all of this text. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-R and hit V. And then I'll say component. So now I extracted the mapped component that I got from the component map into a variable that I can now use as the first argument into the component proxy factory .create method. In fact, I can probably collapse my indentation there like that. All right, so now we have to go ahead and actually change our proxy interceptor a little bit. So our proxy interceptor no longer needs a reference to the actual mapped component, so I'm going to remove that parameter entirely. Now that I've removed that parameter, I'm going to jump all the way down to the implementation of proxy interceptor, down here, and I'm going to change it up a little bit. First of all, the mapped component field is no longer necessary, so I'm going to remove that. I'm going to remove the parameter, and I'm going to remove the line in the constructor that references it. Next up, instead of implementing IInterceptor, it's going to implement iStatic proxy interceptor. And by implementing iStatic proxy interceptor, I'm going to hit Alt-Enter to implement the missing members. And these missing members are the intercept void method, intercept method with response, and intercept method with result. I'm going to put these above the intercept method because effectively what I'm going to do is instead of this if statement that I have right here, I'm basically converting this if statement into separate methods. So I'm going to leave both on screen so both are visible, and then I'm just going to go ahead and get writing. So the intercept void method is going to be equivalent to this method right here. So that's pretty straightforward. It's simply OperationWriter.invoke method, passing in the mapped method and the arguments. The intercept method with response is going to be return, or sorry, let's see, it's going to be var deferred equals new deferred RPC method. And then I'm going to say OperationWriter.invoke method, passing in the method and passing in the arguments and passing in deferred.setResult. And then I'm going to return deferred. Didn't mean to jump all the way up there. Then on intercept method with result, I'm going to say var deferred. What do we need to do here? Well, actually, what we can do is... no, we can't. That's no fun. Okay, so I'm going to say var deferred type equals type of deferred, or actually deferred type, let's see here. Derp. Deferred type is the deferred RPC method generic dot make generic type, passing in the type, which is going to be method dot result type. Then I'm going to say var deferred equals activator. So I'll go ahead and use the activator here. This is client side. It's not going to be performance critical. Deferred type. Then let's see. I'm going to have to say OperationWriter.invoke method, passing in the mapped method, passing in the arguments, and then passing in a cast to deferred RPC method deferred.setResult, and then I'm going to return cast to IRPC method of t deferred. So that was fun stuff. So that's basically our new proxy interceptor. Super exciting. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the intercept method because that's no longer needed. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit F6, and now I'm only... Well, actually, no, I am getting errors. No, I'm only getting errors in the server. So the client is now done. So here is the proxy interceptor if you guys want to pause and take a look at that. But if you don't, the last thing we got to do is fix up our server. So our server, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove the castle dynamic proxy at the top. And let's see here. So then down here in client proxy, I'm going to say, oh, what do I call that thing again? I always forget what I call that thing. Blah, blah, blah. Component proxy factory. I'm going to say component proxy factory, which of course I can't do component proxy factory yet because I don't have the server project referencing my base generated. So I'm going to open up server, right-click references, hit add reference to base generated. Then hit OK. Now I'm going to say component proxy factory dot create. Now for the first parameter, I'm going to pass in client component. And for the second parameter, I'm going to leave it the same because I'm going to, just like what we did with the client stuff, I'm going to change the client interface interceptor to actually implement the appropriate interface so that this code will compile. So let's go ahead and scroll all the way down to where that class is defined, and let's change its implementation. First of all, iInterceptor is now replaced with iStatic proxy interceptor. And then second, I'm going to have to implement all the missing methods. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove the intercept method because it's trivial. And I'm going to replace the not implemented exception and intercept void method with what was there before, which is simply transport.senddata.eventWriter invoke method on system, passing in the method.component.id for the component. For the method, it's simply method ID, and for the arguments, it's arguments. What are you complaining about? Oh, it wants the actual method itself. So we can go ahead and pass in the method. For the intercept method with response and intercept method with result, I'm going to leave those as throwing not implemented exceptions. At the moment, we don't support having the server ask the client a question. We don't support having the server send a result or send a thing to the client and get a data back. That only happens at the client level. So we're going to leave that blank. That'll change, of course, when we merge the code bases in the future. The last thing I want to do is I want to remove this parameter, just like what we did before, because we no longer need to keep track of our client interface component. So I'm going to remove the parameter, remove the line with the, remove the line within the constructor, and remove the field. And then the last thing I need to do is I need to scroll all the way to the top and remove the argument that's being passed into the constructor. And that's it. Now I can go ahead and hit F6, and I should get a successful build, and I do, and that's awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up Photon. I formatted my computer a while ago. I do need to go in and get my license installed, but it's okay for now. I'll go ahead and start my Photon as an application, Photon instance as an application, and then I'm going to go ahead and fire up Unity. Now in Unity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say open other, and I'm going to select client and hit select folder. Now I'm opening this up in Unity 5. If you guys do not have Unity 5 yet, go and download it now. It has all the features of Pro, and it's free. So Unity's response to Epic was to basically turn Unity Pro into Unity Free. And now we have all the features. Except, of course, the dark theme, which you still have to pay for. But anyway, that's about it. The upgrade process is literally that. I considered making a video. I considered sitting down. I was like, oh, yeah, I can make a video of how to upgrade the MMO to Unity 5. And decided not to because I literally just did. All right. So basically at this point, all we have to do is make sure that our code is working. So I'm going to hit run and check that out. Our client test works, and so does our other stuff. So to make sure that we're still working with the latest code, and the latest code including our generated stuff, I'm going to come over here into our server project. Or sorry, our server master, open up systems and go into login system. And I'm going to change the error from something bad happened to this proves that we are no longer using dynamic proxy. Also, I'm going to go into Unity, and down in assemblies, I will go ahead and delete all of these assemblies right out of that. Because we changed our references, we are no longer referencing castle.core. I want to go ahead and make sure that the assemblies folder is completely clean in Unity, so that when I come back here and I do an F6, I'm sure that Unity is getting the correct assemblies, and only the correct assemblies. It's not getting anything extra. So we do see that Buzz MMO base generated comes along for the ride. That's really cool. Our client Unity comes along, our base comes along, our log4net comes along, and our JSON comes along, as well as our Photon 3 Unity. So now I can go ahead and hit play, assuming my server's restarted. And I see that I get my client test ping up to 100 like I did before. I get success counts. And if I fail, notice how it says this proves that we are no longer using dynamic proxy. So yeah, that's it. We now have quite a few cool things in place. First of all, looking at the big picture, we now have a way to generate code at whenever we want, and we can apply this technique to virtually any of our projects whenever we need to generate code. This will play a big part in our serializer once we start working on that. Next up, our base project now includes a command line interpreter, which is kind of rudimentary at this point, but we'll expand it in the future, which we'll use for things like dealing with the mod commands. And we have a tool, a command line tool, that we can extend and use for any other sort of purpose that we might need it to do. Like we might need it to do database migrations or other kind of data migrations or anything like that. So I think that pretty much wraps this video up. There wasn't a whole lot else I wanted to talk about, and we'll see you guys in the next one.